Welcome to a tutorial video on learning JavaScript ES6. JavaScript ES6 is the newest version of JavaScript. It is defined by the ECMA script specification. It is sometimes called the EMCA script 2005 edition. But EC6, the common code name for it, is a new version of JavaScript that's defined different syntax and new ways of going about things. This video series is going to cover a number of the different functionality and different syntax you can use as part of ES6 that's available in a lot of common runtimes like Node.js. So in this video, I'm going to cover two new keywords that are introduced in ES6. The first of which is let, and the second which is const. Now, in previous versions of JavaScript, when we wanted to store the value of a variable, we would use the keyword var, V-A-R. And so when we were defining variables, we would used to use var all over the place. Well, in ES6, the two new keywords, let and const, introduce a greater degree of specification. In previous versions, when using var, sometimes variables could get confused depending on the scope of where they were used. That is, if it was used within a variable or used within something else. Let and const are block scoped, which is to say they are defined within whatever block they are used in, invented in, or created in, and they are contained within that block. This gives even greater level of control when using these two keywords when using variables. At the same time, it also increases JavaScript's ability to give different errors for when problems might occur. In fact, let and const give an even greater control over mutability of values. This is an important concept because when we're using var, things could always be changed. If it was a variable, it was var, which means it could be changed on a whim. And it became a lot harder and a lot more complex to create things that were immutable, or that is, are not able to be changed. So let and const introduce these new variability to using values. When we store them we then have to think as developers if we want this to be mutable, that is, if we want it to be changed, or immutable, unchanging. And that's what these two keywords introduce, let and const. Let's finally look at this code here. I'm going to start at line 1 right here. Notice I'm using the keyword let, I have a name of a variable, and then I'm setting a value using the assignment operator right here, this equal sign. And it looks very similar to previous versions of JavaScript. Whereas we would have probably used a var here, var, we're now using let. And let creates a variable that is mutable. So it is similar to var, and then is creating something that can change, but it's also, as I mentioned, block scoped, which is not covered in this video, but is an important detail that helps with JavaScript and how it handles things. So, we can switch our vars for lets, more or less. If we want a value that can be changed later, we're using the keyword let now. If we want a variable whose value will not change after we create it, we want the new keyword const. And that's right here on line 3. These are constant values, which is a functionality available in a lot of other programming languages, but now available in JavaScript as part of ES6. This is a constant value. We set it one time and we will not change it. This is very useful when working with modules or other libraries when we want to use an initial value or establish some type of module, but we want to make sure those values don't change and we don't accidentally overwrite it. That's where this keyword becomes incredibly important and very useful for those situations. So we have these two new keywords, let, things that are mutable, things that can change, const, things that are unchanging once we create them or are immutable. So you'll notice right here, I'm changing the line, right here on line 5, I'm changing the value of new age. And I'm using console.log so we can look at that new value. Now if I attempt to do this on line 9, it will produce an error. So let's see that in practice. Notice it gave a problem right here, assignment to constant variable. So JavaScript is able to keep track of that. And it knows if I used let or const to define this variable. And if I used const, and I try to change it, that's an error. And JavaScript will throw an error and let us know that. So if I take this back out, just comment this out, and we rerun this, we just see 21, which is the new age right here. So in this video, I've covered the two new types of variables using the two new keywords, let and const. And I discussed how let is mutable, values that will change, and const is immutable, values that will not change. And both of them are block scoped now. And if we're using ES6, we're designing in this space using this version of JavaScript. We should just avoid var completely and just use these two new keywords and help us to think through how we're using these variables. If we want something to change, we use let. We want something that will not change, we use const. Thanks for watching.